The Duke of Thornmire did not bow when he crossed the threshold of the ruined house. He looked at Diana Carey the way a man looks at a conclusion he has already reached. "Miss Carey," he said quietly, drawing off his gloves one finger at a time, "I have come to ask you to marry me." The word marry struck the cold drawing room like a gunshot. Diana stared at him. Beyond the glass, snow bore down against the windows of what had once been a proud merchant's house. Inside, the hearth lay dead. The air bit at the lungs. 3 days prior, the servants had left. 2 days prior, the newspapers had printed the full scope of her father's debts. And that very morning, her fiancé had walked away. Yet somehow the most impossible moment of all was unfolding now. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "I believe you are mistaken." Miles Garrett, Duke of Thornmire, did not appear mistaken. Tall, composed, wrapped in dark wool better suited to a ballroom than a frozen parlor, he stood at the center of the room like a man long accustomed to owning whatever surrounded him. "I am rarely mistaken," he replied. Diana's fingers closed around the back of the chair beside her. Barely an hour ago, she had been rereading the short letter that had severed her future. Quote, _6, _, 8 months of promises erased in 3 lines. Lord Philip Harcourt had not even delivered the blow himself, and now the most feared duke in London stood before her, extending an offer of marriage. It carried the shape of a cruel jest arranged by fate. Diana said. She made herself hold his gaze. Miles Garrett's expression did not shift. Yes. Silence filled the space between them. Diana became suddenly painfully conscious of everything. The threadbare carpet, the thin black dress she had worn since the funeral, the twist of hunger low in her stomach. He noticed. She saw the exact instant he noticed. But he said nothing of it. Instead, he moved toward the window, his gaze falling on the quiet street where snow swallowed the sound of passing carriages. "You will lose this house within weeks," he said without turning around. "Creditors are already preparing their claims." Her jaw tightened. "I am aware." "You will seek employment," he continued, his tone measured, "perhaps as a governess." No cruelty in the voice. Only precision. "But your father's scandal will follow you." Diana's nails pressed into her palm. Quote, _17 _. Now he turned. His eyes were dark and entirely unreadable. Quote 18, he said quietly. Quote 19. The words carried the same weight another man might give to the acquisition of property. Diana nearly laughed. Quote 20, quote, she said, disbelief honing her voice. Quote 21, quote 22, quote 23, quote, she pressed. Quote 24, quote. For the first time, something moved across his face. Interest. Quote 25, he said evenly. Quote 26. Her breath stalled. The insult was quiet but impossible to miss. Quote 27, she said slowly. Quote 28, quote 29. Snow tapped the glass. The cold seemed to deepen around them. Diana stepped closer. Quote 30, quote. Miles Garrett regarded her with unnerving patience. Quote 31, quote, he said. Diana despised that he was right. He said, she demanded. That was when he smiled. Not a warm smile. The smile of a man who had already run the calculation to its end. Quote 35, quote, he said softly. Quote 36, quote. Only then did Diana fully grasp that this was not generosity. It was strategy. Quote 37, quote, she said. Quote 38, quote, he corrected. Quote 39, quote. He moved closer, not threatening, but near enough that the air between them drew taut. Quote 40, quote, he said. Quote 41, quote. His voice dropped a fraction. Quote 42, quote. Diana's heart struck hard against her ribs. A duchess. The word felt absurd inside this freezing room. And love? She asked quietly. Something in his expression sealed shut. That, Miles Garrett said, is not part of the arrangement. The answer ought to have made refusal simple. But then she thought of Philip's letter, the funeral account still unpaid, Mrs. Albright's worn expression that morning in the kitchen, and the dull, gnawing emptiness of hunger. How long, she said, measuring every word, do I have to decide? Until tomorrow. At noon, a carriage will come. If you are inside it, he said, I will consider that your answer. Then he walked out into the snow. The door shut behind him. Diana Carey stood alone in the frozen drawing room, staring at the space where the most dangerous man in London had just offered her either deliverance or destruction. Diana Carey did not sleep that night. The house held too much silence, too much absence. Every clock ticked louder than it should. Every gust against the window pane sounded like an accusation. The fire had gone out hours ago. Cold moved through the rooms like an uninvited guest with no plans to leave. She sat at the writing desk. Philip's letter lay open before her still. 3 lines. 3 lines that had dismantled a future she had once thought certain. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 50, underscore, underscore. Diana folded the paper slowly. Set it back on the desk. Not in anger. Anger demanded a kind of strength she could no longer spare. Outside, snow kept falling over London. Inside, the truth bore down harder with each passing hour. She had no money, no allies. And by noon tomorrow, she would either be the Duchess of Thornmire or a woman without a roof. Across the city, Miles Garrett sat alone in his Mayfair library. A single lamp lit the desk where a neat stack of legal papers waited. The marriage contract. Richard Thornberry, his solicitor, stood on the far side of the room, adjusting his spectacles. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 51, underscore, 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 he began carefully. Quote 52. Miles did not lift his gaze from the document before him. Quote 53. Thornberry cleared his throat. Quote 54. Miles dipped his pen into the ink. Quote 55. The solicitor paused. Quote underscore 56. Quote. Miles signed his name, smooth, unhesitating. Quote underscore 57. Quote, Thornberry's brow creased faintly. You understand this marriage will provoke talk? Miles laid the pen down and settled back in his chair. I am the Duke of Thornmire. His voice remained level. Society talks about everything I do. Silence stretched between them. At last, Thornberry spoke quietly. Forgive my concern, Your Grace, but most men of your rank would choose otherwise. Miles rose from the desk and crossed to the tall window overlooking the snow-draped square. Carriages crawled through the winter streets. London looked deceptively tranquil beneath its white covering. Most men, Miles said, seek affection in their marriages. His own reflection gazed back from the glass. I do not. Thornberry studied him. Then why marry at all? Miles answered without pause. Because a duke without a wife invites speculation. Speculation invites opportunists. My distant cousins already circle the estate like carrion birds. An heir would put them to silence. Precisely. The solicitor gave a slow nod. And Miss Carey? Miles's expression remained unchanged. Thornberry exhaled. Miles allowed the barest trace of a smile. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 70, underscore, underscore. Late the following morning, a black carriage moved quietly through the snow-laden streets toward the Carey house. Inside, Miles Garrett sat perfectly still. He did not question her decision, not from vanity, but from understanding. He recognized desperation. He had seen it in her eyes. Pride had concealed it well, but it was there, sharp, bright, just beneath the surface. A woman who had lost everything, yet would sooner endure humiliation than lower herself to beg. Those were the ones who endured, and endurance was the only thing he was extending. The carriage slowed. Through the frost-laced window, Miles saw the narrow street where the Carey house stood quiet among its neighbors. The driver turned slightly. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 71, underscore, underscore. Miles glanced once more at the folded marriage contract resting beside him. Then he stepped down. Snow compressed beneath his boots. The front door of the house opened slowly, and Diana Carey appeared in the doorway. She wore the same black dress. Her face held no color, but her composure remained intact. Neither spoke. Then she stepped forward. Quote 72, quote, she said, voice low. Quote 73, quote. Miles regarded her with care. Quote 74, quote. Silence stretched between them. Diana glanced once behind her at the house where she had been raised, where her father's laughter had filled the dining room, where permanence had once seemed unquestionable. Now the windows stood dark, the rooms held no warmth, and what lay ahead remained shapeless. She turned back to Miles Garrett. Her chin rose. "I accept your proposal, Your Grace." Miles dipped his head once. No victory in it, no visible relief, only acknowledgement. "Very well." He gestured toward the carriage. "Then we should not keep the Reverend waiting." Diana paused only briefly before placing her gloved fingers into his. With that single motion, the most feared duke in London guided his future duchess into the carriage that would carry them toward a marriage forged not from love, but from necessity. The chapel was smaller than she had anticipated. Nestled behind the Duke of Thornmeyer's Mayfair residence, it was an old family chapel, pale stone, dim candlelight, the ceiling arching low overhead. The air carried traces of incense and polished wood. No flowers at the altar, no music, no guests. Only the Reverend, the Duke, and the woman he had selected as his Duchess. Diana stood at the far end of the narrow aisle, gloved hands clasped so tightly the fabric buckled. Mrs. Albright waited quietly behind her as witness. The loyal housekeeper had insisted on being present. Across the chapel, Miles Garrett's butler, Hastings, stood with that same motionless dignity that seemed to permeate every corner of the Duke's household. That was all. No family, no friends, no celebration. Diana had never pictured her wedding feeling like the execution of a contract. Miles waited near the altar. Dark formal coat, immaculate gloves, the sharp angles of his frame caught in candlelight. He appeared precisely as he always did, composed, contained, untouched by sentiment, as though marriage were simply the next item requiring his attention. When Diana moved forward, the soft whisper of her ivory gown filled the chapel. The dress had been chosen by Mrs. Drummond that morning. It fit without flaw. It did not feel like hers. Miles watched her approach without shifting. Only when she reached him did he extend his arm. Quote 78. Quote, he said quietly. Quote 79. Quote. The Reverend cleared his throat and began. The familiar words drifted through the stillness. Something ancient, something distant. Diana tried to attend, tried to anchor herself, but her mind circled the absurdity. Yesterday, a ruined merchant's daughter facing eviction. Today, marrying one of the most powerful men in England, a man who had stated plainly that affection would play no role between them. Your Grace, the Reverend prompted gently. Miles turned toward her. I, Miles Edward Garrett, he said, voice level, take thee, Diana Margaret Carey, to be my lawful wife. No waver in the words. Diana made herself meet his eyes, dark, unreadable. Miss Carey, the Reverend said, your turn. Diana drew a slow breath. I, Diana Margaret Carey, she began, softer but steady, take thee, Miles Edward Garrett, to be my lawful husband. The words tasted unfamiliar on her tongue, unreal. To have and to hold, from this day forward. Promises neither of them intended to honor in the traditional sense. The Reverend continued with quiet efficiency. When the moment arrived for the ring, Miles produced a simple gold band from his pocket. No jewels, no extravagance. He took her hand. His fingers were warm despite the winter chill. Diana felt the slightest tension in his grip as the ring slid onto her finger. Diana, he said quietly. The Reverend offered a faint smile. You may kiss the bride. The chapel seemed to hold its breath. Miles hesitated. Only a moment. Then he leaned forward. The kiss was brief, polite, nearly ceremonial. His lips met hers with the restraint of a man who had no intention of allowing the gesture to carry weight. But something unexpected happened. For the briefest instant, Miles Garrett hesitated, as though something unforeseen had surfaced, something human. Then it vanished. He stepped back at once. It is done, the Reverend declared warmly. I present His Grace and Her Grace, the Duke and Duchess of Thornmeyer. Diana lowered her eyes to the ring on her finger. A duchess. The word carried a weight she could almost feel pressing against her skin. Miles signed the marriage register first. Every stroke precise, controlled. Diana accepted the pen after him. Her fingers shook faintly as she formed the letters of her new name, Diana Garrett. When she set down the pen, Miles studied the page. Efficient, he murmured. She looked up, sharp as glass. Was efficiency part of the contract as well? Something moved behind his eyes. Amusement, perhaps. Among other things. Outside, the carriage stood ready. Snow still wandered through London's streets as the newly married pair emerged from the chapel. Miles extended his arm again. Diana took it, not from trust, but from resolve. She had chosen this road. At the carriage door, she tilted her face toward him. A pause before she spoke. Miles handed her up into the carriage before answering. Then he climbed in beside her and pulled the door shut. The wheels began to turn, he said evenly. He held her gaze for a long, unmeasured moment. Miles Garrett said quietly. The carriage moved through snow-draped London, and for the first time since the ceremony, Diana wondered the very same thing. The Duke's London residence did not feel like a home. It felt like a monument. Marble floors caught the glow of vast chandeliers. Garrett ancestors watched from tall portraits along the walls, silent, authoritative. Every chair, every table stood in flawless order, untouched by the careless warmth of anyone's living hand. Diana felt like a trespasser in a museum. Hastings, the Duke's butler, guided her up the grand staircase without a wasted word. "Your rooms, Your Grace," he said, opening a set of double doors. Rooms, plural. A sitting room, a dressing chamber. A bedchamber larger than the entire upper floor of her father's house. A fire crackled warmly in the hearth. For the first time in days, warmth reached her bones. Hastings continued. A slight bow. He withdrew. The door closed. Diana stood alone. She crossed slowly to the tall windows overlooking Mayfair. Below, carriages rolled past. Ladies in velvet cloaks hurried between shops that glowed with lamplight. London moved on as though nothing had shifted. Yet her entire life had pivoted on a single word. A soft knock. The door opened before she could respond. A woman in her 40s entered, brisk, composed, already assessing. "Quote 107, quote," she announced. "Quote 108, quote." Her gaze swept Diana with practiced efficiency. "Quote 109, quote." "Quote 110, quote." "Quote 111, quote." Mrs. Drummond stated, matter of fact as a ledger entry. Diana nearly laughed. Society. 3 days ago, society had whispered about her father's debts. Now those same drawing rooms would curtsy to her. The reversal felt impossible. Dinner was served that evening in a smaller dining room. Candlelight everywhere, dozens of flames. Miles Garrett stood at the fireplace when she entered. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. For a moment, silence. His gaze traveled over her dark green dress, one of the gowns Mrs. Drummond had insisted upon. "Appropriate," he said finally. Diana settled into her chair at the long table. That is not quite a compliment. It is not meant to be. Servants materialized with the first course, soundless as shadows. For several minutes, only the clink of silverware filled the room. Diana could not endure it. "Your Grace," she said at last, "may I ask you something?" Miles lifted his eyes from his plate. "You may." "You chose me because I had no expectations." "Yes, and because I was convenient." The bluntness still cut, but there was something else. She pressed forward. "Wasn't there?" Miles did not reply at once. Instead, he poured wine into his glass slowly, deliberately. "What makes you believe that?" "Because," Diana said quietly, "a man like you does nothing without purpose." The candle flame wavered in the space between them. At last he spoke. "My sister told me something once," he said. Diana waited. Miles turned his gaze toward the far wall. A portrait hung there, a young woman with soft golden hair and gentle eyes. She said loneliness destroys a person faster than poverty ever could. Diana followed his gaze. "Your sister?" "Philippa Garrett." Something shifted in his voice. "She died 3 years ago." Diana felt a tightness settle in her chest. "I'm sorry." Miles gave a slight shrug. "Fever." But his eyes remained on the portrait longer than necessary. "She hated this house," he added, barely above a whisper. "Why?" "Because it was empty." The words seemed to catch even him off guard. Diana studied him carefully. "You brought me here to fill it." Miles met her eyes again. "No," the answer came instantly. "I brought you here because it was practical." A lie. Diana could feel it, but she did not press. Instead, she asked softly, "Then why do you keep her portrait in the dining room?" Miles leaned back in his chair. "For the same reason I married you." "And what reason is that?" His gaze sharpened. "To remind myself," he said quietly. What happens when I allow sentiment to guide my decisions? The words were cold, but Diana noticed something else. His hand had tightened around the wine glass, as though the memory still ached. And for the first time since their marriage, she wondered whether the feared Duke of Thornmeyer was not heartless at all, merely a man who had buried something deeply human. 3 days after the wedding, the snow began to melt. London streets turned gray and slick beneath carriage wheels. The air carried the promise of rain instead of frost. Inside the Thornmeyer townhouse, however, nothing seemed to shift. Miles Garrett left the house each morning before dawn. He returned late. Though he always joined Diana for dinner, their conversations remained brief, polite, and carefully distant, exactly as the arrangement had been designed. Yet Diana felt the silence pressing harder with each passing day. That evening, the candles burned low in the dining room when Miles finally arrived. He removed his gloves slowly before taking his seat. "You dined late tonight," Diana observed. "Business in Parliament," he replied simply. The servants poured wine. Diana watched him across the long table. "You work constantly. It is expected of me." "And what is expected of me?" she asked quietly. Miles looked up. "You manage the household." "I have done that." "You attend the dress fittings." "I have done that as well." She folded her hands in her lap. "And beyond that?" Miles frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Diana said softly, "what is my purpose here?" The question hung between them like smoke. Miles set his fork down. "You are the Duchess of Thornmeyer." "That is a title," she replied, "not an answer." A faint crease appeared between his brows. "You wish security," he said. "I have provided it." "Yes," she said. Her voice remained steady, but the words carried weight. "You have given me food, warmth, clothing, and a house larger than any I have ever known." She looked directly at him. "But you have not given me a life." Miles was silent. Diana rose slowly from the table and walked toward the window. Rain had begun to fall softly against the glass. "When you proposed," she continued quietly, "you said I would never be cold or hungry again. You kept that promise." She turned toward him. "But you never said anything about loneliness." Miles stiffened. "I assumed," he said carefully, "you understood the nature of our agreement." "I did." "Then why does it trouble you now?" Diana hesitated. "Because the truth felt far more dangerous than silence." "Because," she said finally, "I did not expect you to be quite so absent." Miles studied her. "I dine with you every evening." "But you are never truly here." The words landed harder than she intended. For a moment, Miles did not respond. Then he rose from his chair. "You want honesty," he said quietly. "I will give it." He walked toward the fireplace and stood staring into the flames. "I married you because it was necessary. I know. I do not pretend affection where none exists." "I know that as well." His jaw tightened. "Then what exactly are you asking of me?" Diana swallowed. She had not planned to say it aloud, yet the words escaped anyway. "Attention." Miles turned sharply. She held his gaze. "Not love," she said, "not devotion. Simply an acknowledgement that I exist beyond this arrangement." The room answered with nothing but the soft crackle of the fire. Then Miles spoke, barely above a murmur. "You exist. That is not the same as being seen." The words cut further than she intended. Something passed across his face, a flicker. Brief hesitation, close to regret. He moved slowly back toward the table. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped lower. "I am not skilled at companionship." "That much is evident," Diana said dryly. To her surprise, Miles nearly smiled. Faint, barely there, but it was the first trace of warmth she had ever witnessed in that face. "You are remarkably bold for a duchess married less than a week," he said. "And you are remarkably distant for a husband." Their eyes caught across the candlelight. Something shifted between them, small, fragile, undeniable. Neither spoke of it. But Diana sensed the first hairline crack forming in the armor the Duke of Thornmeyer had spent years constructing. 2 days later, she discovered something she was never meant to find. It happened by accident. The morning had been gray, hushed. One of those London mornings where the sky could not choose between rain and fog. Diana drifted through the Thornmeyer library, a vast chamber lined with dark shelves and rolling ladders. It was the only room in the house that felt alive. Books, at least, did not feign indifference. She was looking for something to fill the long afternoon when she noticed a leather-bound journal lying half open on the desk. Miles's desk. She should not have looked. She knew that. But one line had already seized her eye. Quote, _191 ___. Diana went still. Slowly, almost guiltily, she read the next line. Quote, _192 ___. The room seemed to cool around her. Diana closed the journal at once. So, that was the truth. Not merely a sister lost to illness, a guilt that had trailed him for years. Footsteps behind her. Diana turned sharply. Miles stood in the doorway. His gaze traveled from her face to the journal and back. For a moment, neither spoke. Quote, 193, Diana said quietly. Miles crossed the room without haste. Quote, 194. His voice was steady, too steady. Diana braced for anger. It did not come. Instead, Miles picked up the journal and closed it with care. Quote, 195, quote, he said. Quote, 196, quote, silence stretched between them. Quote, 197, quote, Diana said gently. Quote, 198. Miles gave a soft laugh. It was not a warm sound. Quote, 199, quote, 200, quote, 201. The honesty struck her like a blow. Miles moved toward the tall window, staring out at the gray garden. Quote, 202, quote, he said quietly. Quote, 203, quote. His hand rested against the cold glass. Quote, 204, quote, Diana stepped closer. Quote, 205, quote, 206, quote, his voice grew taut. The admission settled heavily over the room. Diana studied him with care. Miles turned toward her. His eyes were darker now, not cold. Wounded. Diana took another step forward. Quote, 212, quote, 213. The question was quiet, relentless. Miles hesitated. For the first time since she had known him, the Duke of Thornmeyer appeared uncertain. Quote, 214, quote, he said slowly. Quote, 215, quote, 216, quote, 217, quote, silence again. Then something unexpected. Diana blinked. Miles looked away. He stopped. The admission caught them both off guard. Diana felt her chest tighten. Quote, 222, quote, she said softly. Quote, 223, quote. Miles did not answer immediately. The truth was uncomfortable.